Revelation chapter 11 is a continuation of chapter 10, but now it gives us more information about what is happening during the 6 trumpets. So it's going to tell us certain events and about the 2 witnesses that have come during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Revelation 11, 1-4, I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshippers, but exclude the outer court, do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months, and I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. We've been given a time frame of what happens here when the 2 witnesses arrive. Both of the times given here, the 2 witnesses, they're to come for 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. And the Gentiles are to trample on the city for the 3.5 years. This is where we get the 3.5 from. Again, 42 months or 1,260 days. The temple still has a part to play here. The temple will be rebuilt. And no matter what you think about this, it's just a simple fact that people are ready to do it. It is ready to be done. There will be another temple in Jerusalem at the second coming of God. And at this time, when the Antichrist comes, there has to be a temple so that he can set up the abomination that causes desolation that Jesus talks about and Daniel talks about. So this temple is coming. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem, it's an institute that's been created a long time ago. They started making all the things they needed in order for them to run the temple. They've not only raised money enough to build a temple, they could raise it up in less than a year, but they have all the equipment they need, all the clothing they need, they have the sacrifices they need, they have the priests that they need, they have found the Levites, and all this. It's all ready to go. We really need to keep a close eye on Israel. Israel is the timepiece, let's say, of what's going to happen. We need to look at what's happening there in order to look what's going to happen, the events in the future. You know, a long time ago, when Israel was made into a nation in one day, basically it amazed the church, and all the churches became crazy about the second coming, and that's all they could talk about. And they had this expectation that it was coming. Their expectation was not wrong. They were right. It is a huge sign that the coming of Israel back into their nation is a huge sign that the time is short. But all the hype that they made, all this kind of dulled the church now. And now there's an allergy to studying end times, and there's an allergy to it, even to the point where there's all kinds of churches that no longer believe in the rapture anymore, and no longer speak about the book of Revelation and prophecies. And that's so wrong. We should listen to what the church said. It is completely a sign that the end is coming. It's just that it didn't come as fast as they were expecting it to. But that should not stop us from looking at what is happening in Jerusalem. Last year, I believe, the Temple Institute started to make a shekel, which is what they needed to give as an offering to the temple. And on the shekel, they put King Cyrus on it and President Trump on it. Now, you might think that's ridiculous, but they don't think it's ridiculous. They're taking this very seriously. King Cyrus was the one who allowed the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple back in, I think it was around 500 BC or something like that. They see President Trump as the one who was going to allow them back to build this temple again, and I don't know if that's right. This whole thing about the temple being rebuilt is on the back of their mind. It is going to happen, and it is coming very fast. Another huge deal is that in 2018, the Temple Institute actually dedicated the altar and started burning sacrifices on the altar. They were not able to do this within the temple because there is no temple, and they've decided to do this publicly. So they actually dedicated the temple altar, and they've started sacrifices in 2018. This is something they have not been able to do since AD 70. They are moving very rapidly towards reinstating temple sacrifice, and the temple could be rebuilt extremely rapidly. All right, let's look at this, the 2 olives. Who are these two witnesses? Well, here John is told that the two witnesses are the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. This means absolutely nothing to me, but it would mean a lot to the Jews who read the book of Zechariah and who read the book of Ezekiel and the Old Testament. Let's read Zechariah 4:11 to 14. Then I asked the angel, what are these two olive trees on the right hand and the left of the lampstands? Again I asked him, what are these two olive branches beside the two gold pipes that pour out golden oil? He replied, do you not know what these are? No, my Lord, I said. So he said, these are the two who are anointed to serve the Lord of all the earth. The two who are anointed to serve the Lord have arrived in Revelation 11. And these are who they are. They've been prophesied about in Zechariah 4. The Jews would understand what this means, that something amazing is happening during that time. I want to run through several parallels between Revelation and the book of Zechariah. The whole point in doing this is that we really should read the book of Zechariah along with the book of Revelation, because they come hand in hand. Basically, the book of Zechariah is the book of Revelation for the Old Testament. In the book of Zechariah 1:8-11, there is talk about 4 riders and their horses. That parallels the 4 riders and the horses that come in the opening of the 4 first seals in Revelation 6:10. Here's one that's important, so I'll read the verse for you. Jerusalem is to be measured. In Zechariah 1:16-17, therefore this is what the Lord says, I will return to Jerusalem with mercy, and there my house will be rebuilt, and the measuring line will be stretched out over Jerusalem, declares the Lord Almighty. Proclaim further, this is what the Lord Almighty says, my towns will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Zion and choose Jerusalem. Zechariah holds a promise to the people of Israel. This promise has never completely been fulfilled. He says, I will return to Jerusalem and have mercy on it, and the measuring line will be stretched out over Jerusalem, declares the Lord Almighty. And what will happen when the measuring line is stretched out over it? My towns will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Zion and choose Jerusalem. So when Jerusalem is measured again, prosperity will come and comfort will come in Zion, and God will choose Jerusalem. When John is given a reed like a measuring rod and was told to measure the temple of God, immediately a Jew's mind will go back to the book of Zechariah and said, okay, well, it's being measured now. Prosperity is coming. There's something happening here. And not only is in Revelation 11:1, but Revelation 21:15, the angel who talked with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city, its gates and its walls. Here in Revelation 21, the new Jerusalem has come down on the new heaven and the new earth, and the angel is measuring out the city again. And this is the fulfillment of what Zechariah prophesied in Zechariah 1:16-17, where God said, I will choose again Jerusalem, and I will bring about an overflow of prosperity into it. So it first happens during the millennium, where John is giving a measuring rod, and there's a certain extent there's prosperity that comes again on Jerusalem. But it happens again in the new heaven and new earth with the new Jerusalem, and prosperity again is given to Jerusalem. The millennium is portrayed in the book of Zechariah in a lot of places. Zechariah 2:10-11, shout and be glad, daughter of Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you, declares the Lord. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day, and will become my people. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. So this is a prophecy that God himself will come and live among his people, and you may say that's what happened when Jesus came, but that's not exactly what happened. He did come and live among his people, and people did come into his kingdom after that, but many nations were not in his kingdom while he was on earth at that time. During the millennium reign of Christ, Many nations will know him, and he will be with his people in Jerusalem, and they will be able to go to him then. Listen to what Zechariah has to say about the millennium. Zechariah 8:23. This is what the Lord Almighty says. In those days, 10 people from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe and say, "Let us go with you, because we have heard that God is with you." When in history has that ever happened? This will happen during the millennium reign of Christ. Non-Jews from every nation will grab a hold of a Jew, and they will travel to Jerusalem to see Christ and follow him. This is something that will happen in the future. The woman in the basket that we see in Zechariah 5:5-11 is very much like the woman who rides the beast in Revelation 17. We have this woman in the basket she's been put in a basket and put a lead covering over her, and she's been taken to Babylon. So she's been taken to the country of Babylon to build a house for it. So this is the coming Babylon and the coming woman who rides the beast. And you can read, of course, about her in Revelation 17. So that's another parallel between the two books. In Zechariah 11, again, there's something extremely interesting. There's this chapter about the good shepherd and the worthless shepherd. And this is the good shepherd being Jesus, and the worthless shepherd obviously being the Antichrist. Zechariah 11:16-17. For I am going to raise up a shepherd over the land who will not care for the lost, or seek the young, or heal the injured, or feed the healthy, but will eat the meat of the choice sheep, tearing off their hooves. Woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered and his right eye totally blinded. So here we have Zechariah talking about the Antichrist and the wound that is going to be inflicted on him. We can read about this wound. Revelation 13:3. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. We will talk more about this wound that was inflicted on the Antichrist and how he faked a resurrection, basically, in Revelation 13. We will see that when we read Revelation 13. The spirit of supplication that we've been talking about this whole time in the book of Revelation, that Israel will finally turn to the real Christ, that's also mentioned in Zechariah 12:10. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one who mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. When has this ever happened in history? It hasn't happened yet. They've pierced him, first of all. We know that that's Jesus. When have they turned to him? And this is coming up. So Zechariah is so much like the book of Revelation. Again, we see the Armageddon talked about, and the 1,000-year reign of Christ talked about in Zechariah 14:1-9. A day of the Lord is coming, Jerusalem, when your possessions will be plundered and divided up within your very walls. I will gather all nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations, as he fights on the day of battle. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will split into two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountains moving north and half moving south. You will flee by mountain valley, for it will extend to Azel. And I'll skip a bit here. On that day there will be neither sunlight nor cold, frosty darkness. It will be a unique day, a day known only to the Lord, with no distinction between day and night. When evening comes, there will be light. On that day living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half to the east to the Dead Sea, and half to the west to the Mediterranean Sea. In summer and in winter the Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day there will be one Lord, and his name the only name. Revelation 16:16. Then they will gather the kings together to a place that is in Hebrew called Armageddon. It talks about this battle. The prophecy in Zechariah 14 is for several time periods, and we need to be able to distinguish that. But it's definitely talking about the second coming, where Jesus will come to Armageddon, defeat the armies of the Antichrist, and then reign on earth. Verse 9 here, the Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day there will be one Lord, and his name the only name. This will be an earthly kingdom, and has not happened yet. Revelation 11:3-6. Let's talk about the two witnesses. And I will appoint my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They are the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouth and devours their enemy. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. And they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. So during the first 3.5 years, the Antichrist is using supernatural abilities to amaze the world, and they all follow him. And the two witnesses also have supernatural abilities. Fire come out of their mouths to destroy whoever comes against them. No one can kill these two witnesses that are in Jerusalem during their ministry, and they will be speaking out against the Antichrist and against the world, basically, and the whole world will hate them. It says when they die that everybody sends gift to each other. They all see them dead laying there in the streets, and they're all rejoicing. So they all hate these men who proclaim truth. These men have the ability to cause plagues and to turn water into blood and to stop rain from raining in various countries. Many people would believe that these two are Elijah and Moses. I don't see why they would not, and they could very well be someone else, and honestly it doesn't really matter to me, but Elijah seems to be a good choice for this, stopping the rain from raining and calling down fire to burn up soldiers and the like. It's also interesting to notice that everybody expected Elijah to come back. In the New Testament, everybody thought that John the Baptist was him, and everybody thought that Jesus was him, but they were not. So it's very likely that he is coming back, and that he's a very good choice for one of these guys. It's also interesting to notice that in Matthew 17:1-3, during the Transfiguration, it was Elijah and Moses who came to talk to Jesus on the mountain. It's very likely to be them. To me, it doesn't really matter who they are. What really matters is we can see that there is still witnessing going on, but not by the church. The church is no longer there to witness to the people of the earth. This is how they die. Revelation 11:7-14. Now when they had finished their testimony, and only when they finished their testimony were they able to die, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days some from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who lived on earth. But after the 3.5 days the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, while their enemies looked on. At that very hour there was a severe earthquake, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe had passed, and the third woe is coming soon. We noticed how people hate the truth still, and they're still completely for the Antichrist. They hate what is right. We see that chapter 10 and 11 gives us more detail about what is happening on earth during the first 3.5 years of tribulation. We will look into chapter 12 later on.